First, I wanted to thank you for your service to our country as a veteran. And the other thing is I wanted to know is, where are you originally from? What hometown?
Yeah, born in San Jose, California, but spent most of my growing up years in the San Joaquin Valley, so central California,
Okay.
at farm country.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to wonder. Yeah, your undergrad is in agricultural business.
Yeah, I
And
thought I
of
was going to be
course,
a farmer.
well, that's good.
Didn't
You
work
know,
out.
well, it probably worked out better for all of us that you didn't make it as a farmer. So, but yeah, that's very similar to the area around here in Central Texas
Mm-hmm.
that we're in. A lot of agriculture, a lot of other things too. So, I just wanted
Yeah.
to touch base on that. The other thing is, what made you decide to join the Air Force?
So I saw the movie Top Gun, and like, hey, that looks like fun. And of course, the Navy wasn't hiring, so I got in the Air Force. Yeah, I flew the B-2. Yeah, I mean, it was really just the allure of flying jets, and then one thing led to another.
Okay. And so, are you excited about the new Top Gun movie coming out?
I
Looking forward
am,
to
yeah,
seeing it?
I'm looking forward to it. Actually, one of the writers on that movie is the son of one of my good friends. So,
Oh, well, that's interesting. All right. Well, I'm gonna jump into it now. Are we at war with China and just don't know it?
oh yes, we've been at war for decades. We really didn't recognize war because they fight it in a different way. It's political, it's ideological, it's psychological. And now there's so many more tools they can use. The internet, they can use economics and finance and politics, geopolitics, the international order, international institutions like the UN, the World Bank. All of those things become arenas or battlefields, if you will, in this international competition.
Okay. And so I've heard several interviews that you've done, and it seems like when you were over in China, you really enjoyed it. Things were good. And in fact, you discussed, moving back after you retired and starting a business, right? And what I wanted to know is, when was the moment that you realized what was going on, and how did that make you feel? I mean, were you scared? Were you terrified? I mean, what was that moment like?
Yeah, it was I was sitting in the Pentagon. I left the Council on Foreign Relations in the summer of 2014 to go work for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and on China. And I had a team of China experts working there. And so we started working on the islands in the South China Sea. And I was trying to get a handle on China as a competitor, as a collaborator. What was it? And in the fall of 2014, I got a briefing from one of the people I'd met at the Council on Foreign Relations, a businessman, and he had had $1 billion invested in China. We had been talking about China since the prior fall. He believed that they were going to be the most dominant country in the world, and I just couldn't understand that. So he sent me this briefing. I opened the briefing up, and essentially it was a briefing about Chinese attacks on U.S. companies, all kinds of different markets and industries, different methodologies of attack, different tactics. And as I looked at that briefing in my cubicle in the Pentagon, I tell people my mind broke, because it challenged everything I knew about the world and basically flipped it on its head. And ever since, I've been trying to understand better how things work, and more importantly, how they don't work for U.S. national interests. And so that was the beginning. That briefing. Now, that briefing had been briefed to the National Security Council the year prior, and they just didn't have the capacity to understand the implications of it. And for whatever reason, I had the right set of I've had the right set of experiences and background to be able to absorb it and then apply it in a way that a warfighter applies information, and not in the way, maybe a businessman might apply information.
So how's that affected the overall understanding of what's going on right now, and has the awareness begun to permeate more into the culture? Would you say we're at a 5% awareness of what's going on as a culture in the United States, or are we at 20? I mean, how close are we to really a critical mass of people understanding what's going on?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely, we have widespread acknowledgement now that the Chinese are a problem.
Right.
What we don't have, I call it unspecified anxiety. They're a problem. We don't know exactly why they're a problem. Most Americans know they're a problem. In the national security arena, people definitely know they're a problem. But at the same time, in terms of how do you deal with it, what's the application of a counter strategy by the United States? Most of them don't understand it. And then the reason is because they've never been given the tools to deal with the world in the way that the Chinese deal with it, right? We are, in the military, are trained to fight with weapons that destroy and kill. And those are not the weapons that the Chinese Communist Party has chosen to fight with. And so we're kind of at a loss, in how to deal with it. It's like coming to a job, with the wrong tool and not really knowing how to do the job because you have the wrong tool. And so it is a case where we have to give the people in our society, which are the ones that defend us, the tools to actually understand how they compete with this regime.
And now, do you think there's any U.S. Military, or how pervasive is the awareness of China in our U.S. military technology? Are they fully aware of pretty much everything that we have, or do we still have a few secrets out there that might surprise them? How is that? Because, I mean, we hear constant stories about how they're so in line with the various research colleges and all of these other things. But from your perspective, where do you think we stand on that sort of process?
I think they're very aware of our technology in the military, and to a greater extent than probably we even recognize. But although with that, we recognize that they know a great deal. So they have been very, very good at focusing on, one of their main avenues of attack is through cyber and through the internet. And quite frankly, that has been a sideshow for the American military. And so, they're using everything at their disposal, including their companies, including their citizens, to get at this information that they need. And we have, we just don't have the capacity yet to understand. And quite frankly, we haven't built the infrastructure to protect those things. We have built our digital world on a very open architecture. And so that's why they built the Great Firewall. They recognized how open we were, and they said, well, if they're that open, we're open too. We need to protect not only ourselves, but our population from understanding what it is to live in a free country. Otherwise, they'll lead to a revolution. So, I mean, they grasped very quickly the importance of the internet. We have not. We still have not.
So how do you thread that needle in the government be too authoritarian to control and censor like they do, yet still be open enough that and you can still be closed enough, I guess, that you can protect citizens and companies and that sort of thing? Is there a kind of a balance there, or what, in your opinion, what is?
Yeah, our Constitution, our government really guides us in that answer, and this is one that I struggled with as well. So, and I use the Second Amendment as probably the most poignant reminder of what kind of country we live in. We give our citizens the right. Actually, we tell our government that it must not infringe upon the right of the citizens to keep and bear arms. Now, that's something that is deeply buried in our core, in our foundation, in our principles, in our values as a nation. In the digital world, we have the power now, and in primarily it exists in Russia and China and other authoritarian regimes, to use the internet as a method of influencing populations and individuals without them knowing it. And so a gun can protect you in instances when you're being oppressed and you can see who that oppressor is. The problem with influence today, coming from Russia and China primarily, but others as well, is that we oftentimes don't know that we're being influenced and don't know who that influencer is. And so when you cross that digital bridge into a more virtual world, and you realize that it's very difficult for you to tell fact from fiction, and a lot of it's designed to get you to act in ways that are counter to your own values. You realize that the gun is really it was a powerful symbol of independence and of the American people from an oppressive government. But as we moved into a digital world, we need something else. And that thing is really encryption. It's really about data security. It's really about owning the keys to your own digital life and not allowing the government or any other foreign government to have access without your knowledge and permission. And so in that case, encryption becomes, in effect, the digital equalizer for a democratic society. You have a right, or you should have a right in a free society, to own and control your own data. No government, no agency, no company should have the ability to rewind your life and essentially have full access to everything that you do and know and are as a person. That's essentially the world that's been built around us. While we have been, partaking of things that make our lives more convenient, we've also been partaking in things that make our life more authoritarian. And that's exactly what the Chinese and the Russians figured out, that the power of Google and Amazon and Facebook is a power that they can use to then turn and influence populations and individuals in ways that they want. And that's what they're doing. So that's the bottom line is, we have to secure our data. We need the ability to own and control the power over our digital lives. It's not a gun, it's encryption.
Well, and that's a good segue to how much of our current unrest do you think is being caused by, or at least advanced by, say, the CCP or the Russians or some other entity?
Yeah, so the those that commit violence and looting are doing so. So think about mass disorder and civil disobedience that leads to rioting and looting and pillaging. So there's a spark and then there's fuel. The spark is Antifa and some elements of Black Lives Matter and other organizations that and other right-wing organizations. So basically fringe elements on the left and on the right that seek to spark violence that then precipitates a harsh crackdown by the police. That's what they're going for, which then further influence. So it's basically a spark that starts a fire. And now I don't know what the amount of financial incentives that are coming from China and Russia into those organizations are. I don't think there's zero, but we're going to have to wait and see what investigations actually reveal on that. But on the social media part, which is the fuel, right? Getting more people to show up to these protests. that they're definitely involved in, and we've seen that, all the way back to 2016 elections with the Russians, but now recently with the Chinese. 40% of the of social media posts with regard to coronavirus were bots. These are artificial intelligence bots that are designed to add more fuel to the fire coming from outside our borders. The same thing is going on with regard to the riots and the looting after the George Floyd incident. So that's not that addition of fuel, right? So what they are trying to do is get more dissent, get more people out on the streets, get more protesters, that then mixes with those that are creating the sparks that really turns us into a big fire. And so that's what's going on. And there's, unfortunately, in the United States, we don't have a good mechanism for detecting that. The ones that are detecting that these days are some of the researchers that are doing research in our universities with regard to social media. They call it social cybersecurity. In other words, hacking people's minds rather than hacking computers. It's really about understanding how these social media platforms are used by outsiders to induce this kind of behavior.
Okay, well, yeah, and shift gears on you a little bit. Tell you a couple of stories that when I read your book kind of resonated with me. Probably, it's been well over 10 years ago. Me and a coworker liked to visit a particular restaurant, and we had gotten to know the guy, and he was a person from China. Had immigrated here, and he operated the restaurant. And we would ask how's business going and that kind of thing. And one there for a while, he started saying, it's not going very good. We're not doing well. And I guess I don't know if I just we caught him on an odd day, or we developed enough of a relationship. And I mean, this is over 10 years ago. He told us that, he goes, if things don't turn around soon, they're going to ship me back. And I was like, well, how does that happen? What do you mean ship you back? I mean, don't you own this restaurant? He goes, yeah, I own the restaurant. It's in my name and that sort of thing. But I said, but how can they ship you back? I mean, your visa's in good shape. All that's, everything is fine. And he goes, no. And I said, well, just tell them, no, you're just going to stay here and make a go of it or whatever. And he's like, I can't do that. I said, well, why not? He goes, because I still have family back there and they could be killed. And it just blew me away at the time. But I had that one isolated conversation experience, and maybe the guy's, fibbing, maybe he's exaggerating. Who knows what the scenario is? I don't even know what to do with that information, right? And then fast forward probably a couple of years ago, we had a major massage parlor bust in town, where it was a Chinese national that had operated it. She also operated ones in Austin, but she had videotaped at least 400 local people that we know in various stratas of life and clearly compromising positions. And I just remember thinking at the time, why would you videotape the evidence of a crime? That makes no sense to me, if you were going to be involved in that criminal activity. But when I start putting some of these pieces together after reading your book, it starts to make a whole lot of sense as to what that information could be used for and how things can be manipulated. And then you think, I'm in Waco, Texas, a tiny little town in the middle of Texas. But, why are they, I can understand it in New York or LA or a big city, but why is this happening, in Waco, Texas? And how granular is their influence? How deep does it run, and how pervasive would you say?
Oh, it's deep. And that's, I think, one of the challenges that I face is I expected, as I started to peel back the layers of this onion, that eventually I'd get to the bottom of it. And to this day, I learned something new every single day about how deep it goes. And they've fashioned such a, really, I think, what I would call brilliant way of operating that, it's very difficult for us to wrap our minds around. Essentially, they created a system that, through using a closed financial system and the access to foreign capital, they've been able to funnel that capital in ways that essentially get, the wealth initiative in people, the kind of the greed factor, right? So there's two major motivating factors for human behavior: greed and fear.
Yeah.
And so they've really motivated both, but primarily greed. So that, the idea is you get rich, but, the Chinese Communist Party gets what they want. And they're so good that it's not just, the Chinese people that they have co-opted in this. They've also co-opted our own companies and politicians and in law firms and in investment banks. And so it becomes very difficult because we're not just fighting the Chinese, we're also fighting our own system, as these people have been so thoroughly incentivized to go along. And they go along because there's this narrative that, wealth leads to democracy. And so they're, by doing business with the Chinese Communist Party, you're making the world safe for democracy. That's how, that was, I think, the key, thing that unlocked it for me, that, wow, this is something that we use to promote democracy. Free trade and democratic principles go hand in hand. And actually, and so we think of the free market, the open financial system as a means for spreading these democratic principles, when in reality, the number 2 economy in the world has taken and undermined every single one of those. So we don't have a free trade system. We have in most markets and industries, the price for something is set by China based on, their dominance of the industry. They funnel resources, financial resources that would be used for capital investment in the United States into China, that then can be turned around and used to buy high-tech companies or, pay off, big corporations to come and be a partner with Chinese companies. So eventually they can grab that market share. And it's a brilliant way of doing things.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of when you read the history of the Dutch East India Company. I mean, it's less, the more that I research that, the less it seems like a nation in the traditional thought process that I have here with my Western views, and more like just a massive multinational company.
Well, it is, and but it's a multinational company or regime in a world where borders and sovereignty are considered to be less important to promoting the values and principles of the nations of the world. And so I think we believed that the United States was so ascendant in terms of a system, a political system, and an economic system, that we could promote those same kinds of systems abroad. And what the Chinese were able to do was essentially hijack that, and so that rather than us promoting our principles, they're promoting theirs. And so we are in a world that, and that's why I said, my mind broke back in 2014, because I realized that here we'd gone from being the one that was spreading its ideology around the world, I would argue, to the betterment of the world, because many of the values that we believe are universal, that had been essentially co-opted. So we had created all this openness, globalization, and the internet. We developed that, and the Chinese basically hijacked it to promote the kind of world that they want. And we just were oblivious to it. We were literally asleep to that fact.
And how have you seen the CCP affect small businesses at say a local level? Have you seen evidence of that? And if so, any examples? I know you had some in the book.
Oh yeah. I mean, so yeah, the book is a great example of people that, kind of individual entrepreneurs that sell their products on Amazon. I think Amazon has been one of the worst destroyers of small business in America. Now, everybody would say, well, yes, but Amazon makes my life better. Well, at the end of the day, if your life is all about consumption and not about kind of creating your own economic future, then yes, you're right. It does make your life better. But many of our many people in America want to start a business and want to be able to make it. And what Amazon does is make it very Amazon plus the rules, like allowing Chinese companies to direct ship to consumers in the United States, and the fact that we're subsidizing postage from China to the US means that American companies can't be competitive. And so this narrative that Americans are lazy and can't be competitive is perpetuated by the ease with which these Chinese manufacturers, who essentially steal the marketing, the advertising, and the engineering of the companies that do start a business in order to direct ship to customers in the United States, counterfeit of these products that don't actually work or break after the first use. I mean, they have destroyed many small businesses, thousands, tens of thousands of small businesses. When you add that into the tens of thousands of factories that shut down after China entered the WTO, what you have is the makings of economic devastation. And so when I was at the White House, I wanted people to understand this in visual terms, because most people think and learn visually. And I said, go look at pictures of Dresden, Germany after the 8th Air Force got done with them in World War II. And then go look at the pictures of Detroit, Michigan today. Look at those pictures aftermath. Look very similar. One was bombs. The other was, globalization and the internet. And so, understanding how these things actually are brought back, in spades to us is what, stealth war is all about.
So how can a small business, that doesn't have, a lot of reach or resources, how can they protect themselves from this sort of onslaught, just not do anything they want to?
No, they can't. I mean, that's the whole point. That's the whole point of stealth war. They can't. They don't have the power to defend themselves against a nation that's committed to their destruction. But they don't have to. That's the role of the federal government. The whole preamble of the Constitution, provide for the common defense. That's what, the whole point of stealth war is, we don't need troops fighting in the Middle East. What we need is to defend our corporations and companies and small businesses and, entrepreneurs and the working class from having their vision of the American dream stolen from them. That's the whole point of what China's doing. They don't want to go to war with us. They don't want to put their infrastructure at risk. All of these gleaming cities and bridges and highways and high-speed rail that they've built. That would be insane. What they want to do is erode our wealth over time to the point where the United States ceases to function as a democracy. That's what they're trying to do, and they've really accelerated that with the coronavirus, which they spread on purpose, and then also with these recent riots and looting. So this is their strategy, and it's quite frankly, it's been working quite well for them. What we need to do is separate ourselves from that. Make sure that they don't have access to our economy, make sure they don't have access to our society, and make sure they don't have access to our information. And when that happens, you're going to see this resurgence in the American dream. That's essentially what the current national security strategy is about, and why we need to give that time to actually work.
So how can you tell if a business or an institution has been significantly compromised by the CCP when you're interacting with them or attempting to interact with them? Is there any?
Do they have a joint venture with China? Do they have any Chinese nationals working with them? Do they have adequate cybersecurity over their intellectual property? If you can go look at those three things, and I can tell you right away if that company is going to make it or not in the current environment. And unfortunately, that one of those three, and in many companies, all three of them have led to a breach of the company. And it's just a matter of time before the company, essentially loses its role in the world. Particularly, look, the Chinese are looking for particular technologies, particular industries. They want to be global champions, the largest companies in terms of market capitalization in the world. And so if you've got one of those are going to be high on your target list, or on their target list, which means you're in the crosshairs.
So how close a call was it with the 5G from Huawei's implementation here in the United States that we were able to stave off, at least it appears that maybe we have? How close a call was that?
Well, so the 5G is a very unique problem because there's a business problem and there's a technology problem. The technology problem is really the open data model, the ability, as I talked about, to take everybody's data and use artificial intelligence to influence people, to surveil and influence them. But the other problem is actually a business problem. It's an industry problem for the telecom industry in the United States, and that is they invested hundreds of billions of dollars in their 4G networks, and then Facebook, Amazon, and Google and others like Apple came over the top, monetized user data, and created these very, very valuable companies, and the tele companies weren't able to pay back their investment for the networks. And so there's no real incentive today for the telecom companies to build out 5G. That being said, that is a good thing because 5G really amplifies the ability of the Chinese to collect data on you. So we don't want Huawei to build a network, but in today's world, the telecoms aren't going to build, Ericsson or Samsung or Nokia infrastructure either because there's no financial incentive to do so. That's number two. And I think number three, from a policy perspective, we, in DC, we don't understand what 5G is. It's not, faster, Netflix. It's really about a computer system that is wirelessly distributed, that has a very different design than any telecom system that's built today. And it's built for the purpose of promoting autonomous things, for promoting artificial intelligence, and for doing so in ways that protect from losing your data. Nobody is building that network in the free world. The Chinese are building it in China, except the one caveat that I would add is that the way they're building it is in order to collect everybody's data. So it's a good that Huawei is not building in the United States, but quite frankly, it's bad because we need to have a network that is secure, that is high performance, that allows us to, be leaders in artificial intelligence, in autonomous things. That is our legacy, the leading science and technology. Today, the federal government has basically has abdicated their responsibility to driving leadership in science and technology to the private sector. The private sector only invests in ways that it can see a clear outcome in terms of financial remuneration. When we were fighting with the Soviets in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it wasn't with bombs. It was with technology. It was with economic growth. So we were spending almost 2% of GDP on science and technology research. Remember the space race? Remember all the high-tech things that the U.S. military had because of all the money we'd been investing in science and technology, and all the scientists we sent to universities on federal grants. This is what we stopped doing at the end of the Cold War, and we haven't got back to it. And you have today a whole generation of policymakers in D.C. that never grew up in that era. And so what the Chinese are trying to do is basically suck the capital, the innovation, the technology, and talent out of our system and use it to build their own society, so that in the end, just like we bankrupted the Soviets, they want to bankrupt us. And so, in addition to separating from their economy and their society, we need to actually invest in our own. And it has to be the government that leads that. The private sector is not going to lead that. So, that's our challenge with 5G.
So how significant is the Section 889 Part B of the National Defense Authorization Act that goes into effect in August the 13th?
Can you just repeat what that is?
Yeah, it's I guess it's the implementation of something a couple of years ago that where companies can't, if you're a government contractor, you can't access it. There's a list of companies. Huawei is obviously one of those.
Oh, gotcha.
Chinese companies. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very important, but it's only a start. You know, I would much rather see us take a significant portion of the Department of Defense budget and focus on incentivizing the creation of a secure, encrypted, 5G network that powers autonomous vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And then we invest in the research and development on artificial intelligence, on quantum computing, on fusion energy, on all these things that I think are going to drive the future. We should be taking a large part of the defense budget and focusing on those things. That's what Eisenhower did. Many elements of the current national security strategy come out of how Eisenhower chose to confront the Soviet Union. We weren't going to meet them in the Fulda Gap with, conventional weapons. We were going to deter war with a very capable nuclear force. And then we were going to focus on building our science and technology and economy faster than the Soviets could. And we believed in free trade and democratic principles as an organizing principle that would be more powerful than, authoritarianism. That same concept still exists, except we've allowed the attachment of this parasite to us to suck all the benefit. Once we close ourselves off and really align with other democracies like those of Europe and Asia that actually see things the same way, you're going to see a different capacity for economic growth and innovation come out of that. And then it'll be, those things will be accrue to the democracies. And then you'll begin to see that, we're outpacing them by leaps and bounds. And then it'll be a different thing. But we have to get into that. We have to arrange ourselves in that way before we can start to see the benefits.
So now, so how do you think our 5G implementation? I hear that the telecom companies are coming out with it, and it's rolling. They're not. Okay.
No, they're not. They don't have, for each added capacity, the financial incentive isn't there for them to invest in it. So it's very minor investments. Okay. At the current investments pace in 5G, you're well past 2030 before we have 5G predominantly in the United States. Mm-hmm. And then it's an insecure 5G, right? It's built on a security foundation that is nearly non-existent. So it just keeps the American industry and commerce and then the American people open for stealing of their data. So we're on the current path. We're going nowhere fast.
And what's the implementation? The implication of that, the path that we're currently on with that technology. I mean,
China basically does to the United States what we did to the Soviet Union. That's the implication.
Okay, so
that's where we're headed.
So I mean, it's kind of we're just not even bothering to. I mean, is it we're not locking our door, or do we have a crappy lock, or do we even have the door open? I mean,
no. Again, the government is looking to the private sector to lead. And that's not the private sector's role. That their job is not to protect the American people. It's to meet their quarterly profit expectations. And the way AT&T does it, for example, is to buy Time Warner and become a media company, and to say that the CEO of AT&T says his competitor is Disney. That's what they say to the market. They're loaded with debt. $180 billion for AT&T. I think $160 billion for Verizon. They're not building 5G networks. And if the 5G networks that they're building are not the kinds that get you to self-driving cars and advanced manufacturing and, remote surgery, that's not what they're building. You would not want a remote surgery device to be connected to Verizon's network. It's just common sense that exists there. And so we can't allow the private sector to lead, America into the 21st century. The federal government actually has the responsibility to do that.
Do you have any idea what the cost of investment for that infrastructure to get caught up, say, with the Chinese would be right now?
It would be, let's say, on the order of let's see, we have an $800 billion budget, right? So it would be less than a tenth of that, $800 billion defense budget, less than a tenth of that. And I'm not even saying that that needs to come from the government. It could be completely privately financed. $50 billion gets you a high-speed, state-of-the-art, wireless AI platform that is peerless in the world, and it will be paid off by, the customers that use it, right? So it's just like the Eisenhower National Highway System is a good example. It paid for itself in dividends in terms of economic activity through the trucking industry, but it was originally designed for national security. So a network like I'm talking about would protect our electrical grid, would protect the data of our government systems and also our largest commercial enterprises, and it would allow the American people to have their data protected. So, it's really about, thinking differently about how we invest in the things that that power us into the future. The federal government could say, hey, we're going to give somebody so the federal government today is the largest purchaser of IT services in the country. It could say, hey, we're going to give that a contract to build out that and service that, and that's where we're going to contract as a government. We need services. We would prefer to get that on a secure 5G network, built by somebody, and then have somebody build it. You can't have the telcos build it because they have insecure networks that are built on legacy technology. You have to build it state of the art from the ground up, brand new, only 5G, not 2G, 3G, and 4G and 5G like they're building now. And then you would have to put the kind of computing assets at the edge that allow you to drive autonomous vehicles. That is not what they're building. They have no interest in building that because right now they're focused on, serving their own clients, movies and social media posts. That's what their business is. It's not, manufacturing. It's not logistics. It's not medicine. That's not what they do.
So you interact with lawmakers on a regular basis, I would assume. And what kind of pushback have you been getting? Are you making headway with convincing some of the folks about the need?
Yeah, in fact, I just testified to the House of Commons in the UK about exactly what I'm telling you, and I was joined there with Senator from Arkansas, was Cotton. That was basically said the same thing. So some of the people are beginning to understand the difference between when AT&T says they're building 5G and what the American secure 5G that we need to run self-driving cars. That there's a difference between those two, and that we can't rely on AT&T and build it because that's not their business model. So I think that's people are becoming aware of that. So. But it's still, in such small numbers, and we're still not taking a leadership role like we need to.
Well, and I think one of the reasons there's no real, until either the American people recognize the true threat that we are up against, there's not going to be much of a
right. Yeah. And right now, when the narrative is controlled by the telco industry, they say we're building 5G. In fact, DoD announced last week in one of their 5G announcements that the telco industry is investing hundreds of billions of dollars in 5G. No, they're not. I can guarantee you they're not. What they go to look what AT&T told the market, they're going to spend $19 billion paying down debt this year. That's what their focus is. It's not investing in 5G. And it's just, having people that are knowledgeable about the industry actually bring truth to the problem and say, hey, the government has to lead because industry is not, think about if we would have asked industry to go do the Manhattan Project. They'd be like, first of all, you guys are going to be the only customer and, we're not going to make a lot of money on this. We're not going to do that. No, it had to be an industrial program led by the government. Now, again, I'm not saying that the government has to build it, but they certainly have to create the incentives in the system to ensure that it gets done.
good. If you can tell me, what do you think happened in Wuhan with the virus? What's your take on that? As far as, I mean, we've heard all kinds of different, scenarios, but from somebody that knows China, knows, national defense, and I'm sure you followed it. What is your take on what happened there?
Yeah, so we know from Xi Jinping's own mouth that he was in charge of what was going on in Wuhan on the 7th of January. Of course, I was in as a defense attaché in Beijing in December of 2016 and witnessed firsthand as I negotiated the return of the UUV that they had taken in the South China Sea, that Xi Jinping has, very fine control down at the very tactical edge. So, and this ship that he was directing to give back the underwater vehicle that they had taken, he was in full control of that. So when he says he's in full control of Wuhan on the 7th of January, he is in full control. Now, what did they do, subsequent to that? Well, first of all, they knew that they had human-to-human transmission. They pressured the World Health Organization not to say anything. And they allowed for international travel during the peak travel season of China for the New Year. Okay, so now what we have is 5 million people that leave Wuhan before they shut it down on the 23rd of January. Now the president a week later shuts down our travel to and from China, but what he doesn't shut down is travel to and from Europe. And so all those people from Wuhan go to Europe, then they come to the East Coast, and that's where we've had most of our issues with regard to the coronavirus. So they deliberately caused a spread of the coronavirus. And at the same time, in those fateful months or weeks in January, they were turning from a net exporter of PPE to a net importer. So not only do they know they have human-to-human transmission and allow for international travel out of Wuhan, knowing that, they also at the same time were hoarding PPE en masse so that they could take advantage of the ensuing infections that were to occur. So they completely did this, and I think it really, you have to go back to Unrestricted Warfare and see how this is laid out in the pages of that book that those two People's Liberation Army colonels wrote. And then in March, they started with the social media posts and the text message to American people trying to convince them that martial law was going to be established. So, it's just a pattern of behavior. As far as did it get released from a lab or was it, come from a wet market? I'm inclined to believe that it was accidentally released from the lab. And then the Chinese Communist Party, being the opportunistic regime that it is, sought to spread and take advantage of that release.
Now, I've several geopolitical strategists, I say several, couple actually, seem to be under the impression that China won't be a unified country within the next 10 years. What's your take on that?
You mean unified in terms of Taiwan?
Well, no. In terms of a lot of the coastal cities, because its inability to continue to maintain the covenant they have with their people, in that you give us everything and we'll make life better every day that moves on, and what with the new climate and with money not rolling into China, or at least maybe it's just perceived that it's not or not right. Going to. That those coastal cities will make their own trade deals, kind of separate, and that there might be some sort of a China back to its historical roots, where the coastal parts were controlled or more independent than, say, an entire unified.
Yeah, so the Chinese Communist Party is the most technologically sophisticated totalitarian regime in the history of mankind. They have fully embraced technology as a means to control and influence their population in ways that that protect the Communist Party. I don't see them cracking anytime soon. They're really, really capable of what they do. The first prison that they create is the prison of the mind. And when you imprison the mind and you maintain that prison, then it's very, very difficult for people to realize that that's going on. And we see that from people that actually come to the United States, and that prison stays in place pretty well when you're in the United States, because they stay on the same social media platforms. They, all Chinese language media is controlled outside of China by the Chinese Communist Party. So they're getting the same kind of flavor of information. And it's only when they choose to really engage at a deep level with Americans philosophically that they begin to understand that, hey, there could be something else out there. And then the more they learn about their real, true history, their own history, things like the Tiananmen Massacre, the farther they come out of that shell. And so it's almost a deprogramming that they have to go through. And none of them go through that for the most part when they come here to university, because there's 500,000 kids in our university system that pretty much stay in clusters and speak Chinese and stay on social media and like WeChat and Weibo, and they listen to Chinese media. And then of course they're warned if they become too Americanized, they won't find a job when they get back home. So I don't think people understand how powerful the digital world is in basically maintaining this prison of the brain outside of China's borders. And that's why, they do things like trying to fire Daryl Morey of the Houston Rockets. That's why they try to, that's why in my book, they had Marriott Corporation fire, Roy Jones, who had liked to tweet about Tibet. It's why they try to control the narrative about China, because they know that that's one of the easiest ways to protect that, prison of the brain that they've created for the Chinese people. And for the most part, they've done it for Americans too, in that they've hidden the true nature of the Chinese Communist Party. My son, he just graduated from college, but, last semester, he texted me, said his teacher told him that China's a democracy. I said, okay. Michael Bloomberg says that Xi Jinping is not a dictator. This is how powerful their control of the narrative is. And so it even goes so far in to control our own media. And so it's controlled our own diplomacy. This is one of the things I found when I was working on, as a military diplomat in the United States. They had pervaded our narrative about China in such a way that, that we had been co-opted. And so they're very good at what they do. They're professionals, they're powerful, they're technologically sophisticated. So this idea that the Chinese Communist Party is somehow going to lose control, I think is really, we're much better focused on how do we protect the American people? How do we promote American freedom and prosperity, rather than trying to think about, what's going to happen to China. It's not going anywhere soon with the Chinese Communist Party in control. They're very smart and they know what they're doing.
One final question. Should I be scared to post this interview?
I think people are beginning to understand the type of fight. I mean, 3 years ago, absolutely, you would have been called a kook. I think today people are starting to recognize what's going on. It's common sense. All you have to do is question everything that's been going on, and this for me, the more people I talk to, the more, I explain. It's like the Matrix when you're going to take the red pill or the blue pill. The blue pill, you go back to sleep, you wake up, and the world's still the same. You take the red pill, and then you see how far the rabbit hole goes, and what you find out is it goes pretty deep, and you start to see connections that you didn't see before. So, I think the answer to the question.
Well, General, I certainly appreciate your time. I was really excited to meet with you, and I hope that history sees you as the Paul Revere of our time.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Take care.
God bless.